In this movie, we're going to install the Eclipse C development tools on a PC running Ubuntu 12.04 Precise Pangolin. Note that it's not necessary to install Eclipse in order to take this course. You may use whatever development environment you like. In fact, I encourage you to use your own development environment. I'm using Eclipse for the examples in this course because it's convenient for this purpose. It allows me to demonstrate the examples in a way that is accessible to students on any of the three major platforms today, Windows, Mac, and Linux. That is the only reason I'm using Eclipse for this course. I normally do my development work with whatever tools are supported on the platform I'm working on, and I encourage you to do the same. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start up the Ubuntu Software Center, which is this little icon here. And we're going to use this to check our version of GCC. GCC is the GNU compiler collection. That's the C compiler that we're using for this course. So I simply type in GCC and I see that it's installed, and I click on More Info. And I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here where I can see the version. I see that the version is 4.6.3. For this course, you need at least GCC 4.7.0. And the reason for that is that we're teaching the C++ 11 standard and the C11 standard, which were both just ratified last year and are not fully supported in GCC 4.6.3. Some of the later GCC 4.6s had some of the features, but GCC 4.7 is the minimum that we're using for this course. So for that reason, I'm going to need to update the GCC on this computer. So I'm going to type in up here GCC-4.7. Searching in the Ubuntu Software Center is a little bit weird, at least as of this version. So there's no simple way for it to tell me what's the latest version available. I've actually installed some more archives here. You probably have too. You may need to have another archive besides the default Ubuntu archive in order to find the latest GCC. So this is the GCC 4.7. I'm going to go ahead and install this. It will install it on this computer in addition to the GCC 4.6 that's already there. We're going to have to update some symbolic links in order to get it to work. We'll get there in a minute. And now that GCC 4.7 is installed, we're going to do the same thing for G++. G++ is the C++ compiler that's part of the GNU C compiler collection, but it doesn't come installed by default. So here we can see that it's not installed on this computer. And if I look inside the one that it found here, we'll notice, at least in this case, because I noticed this before, it's 4.7, but it's not the same 4.7 as the GCC that I installed before. If I come back here and I type G++-4.7, you'll see that I get a different version. I click on More Info down here. See that this one says -3. So this is the one that I want to install. So again, when you're installing stuff like this on a Linux distribution, and this is true of any Linux distribution, because of the open source nature of it, you need to be careful about the versions and make sure that they match. So I'm going to click on Install here, and this will install the GNU C++ compiler. Okay, now that that's done, I need to go and update my symbolic link. So I'm going to bring up the terminal, and I'm just assuming that if you're using a distribution of Linux, that you're somewhat familiar with the terminal. So I may not explain all of the steps as I go along. I'll do my best. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type sudo, which gives me super user root privileges, and I'm going to type su-, which will actually give me a shell as root. And it should ask for my password here. And now I am the most powerful person on this computer. It's possible to do a lot of damage. You need to be very careful how you type and what you type, because there are some commands that you could type by mistake that could potentially wipe out your system. Don't mean to scare you, but you need to be careful when you're typing as root. So I'm going to change directories to user bin, type cd /usr/bin. And I'm going to look and see what we have here in terms of these pieces of the GCC system. So I'm going to type ls-l, and I'm going to type GCC asterisk and G++ asterisk, and these all have spaces between them, and CPP asterisk. These are the three commands that we need to see how they're linked up. ls-l will give me a listing of the directory with a lot of excess information that I actually need in this case. We can see we have symbolic links for CPP and GCC, and those are the ones that are highlighted in the light blue there. And you see that we also have G++-4.7, and there's no symbolic link for G++. So I'm going to start by creating the symbolic link for G++, and I'm going to type ln-s for symbolic, G++ -4.7, and a space and G++. And what this command does is it'll create a symbolic link using G++ -4.7 as the source and G++ as the target. And then when I say ln-s G++, I meant to say ls-l G++. There we see that it has the link now. There is a G++ that is linked to the file that we want. Now I need to do the same thing for the ones that are already linked, which means that I need to delete them first. So I'm going to type rm, which is the Unix command for delete. It's short for remove, and both CPP and GCC. And that will remove those two files that you see highlighted there that are the symbolic links to the old 4.6 versions. And now I'm going to create new links, ln-s GCC-4.7 to GCC, and ln-s CPP, which is the C preprocessor, -4.7 to CPP. Now when I type that original command again, ls-l GCC star G++ star and CPP star, you see that we have exactly what we need. Those symbolic links are now updated, plus we have one for G++, and they're all pointing to the 4.7 versions. So now that that's done and it's correct, I'm going to press Control D for David, and that'll get me out of my root shell, and I'll press Control D again, and that will close the terminal. Now we're going to install the JRE. JRE stands for Java Runtime Environment, and this is necessary for Eclipse. So I'm going to type in here default-JRE. Again, searching for things in Ubuntu Software Center is a little bit of an adventure. And so I'm just typing the exact names because I know what they are. And that may or may not actually work for you if you're using a different version of Ubuntu than I am. So there it is, the standard Java or Java compatible runtime, and I'm going to click on the install button, and that will install Java. Type in my password, and now the Java runtime is being installed. So now that the JRE is installed, we can finally install Eclipse, and we do that by searching for Eclipse, ECLIPSE -CDT. CDT stands for the C Development Tools, and that will install both the Eclipse environment and the development tools. And so we'll click on that and we'll click on install. So now we have Eclipse installed, which requires the Java runtime environment. So we have that installed, and we have the correct version of the GNU compiler collection, GCC, installed. And so now we're ready to start up Eclipse. So I'm going to close out the Ubuntu Software Center, and I'm going to click on this dashboard and type in Eclipse, and just the first couple of letters will find it there. And I'm going to click on that to start up Eclipse. And just as Eclipse starts running, you'll see an icon come up here in the toolbar on the left. So I'm going to right click on Eclipse here in the toolbar, and I'm going to say Lock to Launcher. And that way it'll always be there in the launch bar. Select a workspace, accept the default, and press OK. You can also check this box that says use this as the default and do not ask again. And it loads up all of its stuff. Now I've had this experience before, the first time starting up Eclipse on Ubuntu, and it doesn't actually show me that it's got C++. If I come in here to the preferences, I see that I have the C++ there. So if it didn't show up in here, my experience is by closing Eclipse and starting it up again, it finds it. But there it is. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the workbench over here. And if you know anything about Eclipse, you'll see we have a perspective started up that says resource. What we want is the C and C++ perspective. So I'm going to go into Window. I'm going to say Open Perspective. And there I see the C, C++ in the menu. Again, sometimes it doesn't show up, in which case you can select Other and select C, C++ that way. And now it's changed the perspective and we have the C, C++ perspective. Now I'm going to come in here to the Preferences under Window, and under General, I'm going to open that up and come down to Workspace. And down here under Text File Encoding, you see it says Default UTF-8, and that's exactly what we want. If it does not say UTF-8 on yours, you can select Other and select UTF-8 from this dropdown. But we're going to leave the default there because that's correct on this one. Also under General, I'm going to open up editors and I'm going to select text editors. We're going to check a few boxes in here. I'm going to leave insert spaces for tabs unchecked. I'm going to leave show print margin unchecked. I'm going to check the highlight current line. Actually, everything else in here except those two, spaces for tabs and print margin, everything else in here gets checked. Now we're going to close General and open up C and C++. And I'm going to select on the new CDT project wizard. And under preferred tool chains, empty project, I'm going to select Linux GCC and press this button that says make tool chains preferred. And you'll notice that it puts a little arrow next to that one, and that's what you want. And then here under editor, I'm going to open the disclosure triangle and press folding. You want all of these checkboxes checked that enable the various types of folding, and you want all of these unchecked in the initially fold region. So that's the preferences for now. We're going to set some other preferences in our project after we create a project. So now we're going to create a couple of projects. We're going to actually create two projects. One of them is going to hold all of the exercise files, and the other one is actually going to be for compiling. And the reason for that is you can really only compile one of these files at a time, and Eclipse likes to compile all the files in a project. So I'm going to select this little arrow next to the new button, and I'm going to say project, just the normal project, not any of these other ones, just project with the dots. And under general, just the one that says project. Press the next button and give the project a name. This is going to be CPP Essential Training. And you notice I don't put any spaces in that. My programming projects, I really like to have folder names that don't have spaces in them. That's getting harder and harder to do as desktops get more sophisticated, but there's still a lot of tools out there that will complain about spaces in file names and folder names. So I'll press finish, and that gives us this empty project, and it's got nothing in it. And so we're going to put something in it. I'm going to right click on this, and under new folder, come down here and select the advanced button, and this allows us to link to an alternate location. This way we can load up the exercise files and not have it make a copy of them into our workspace. We don't really need that. We're not going to actually be editing these files in place anyway. So I'm linking to this alternate location and select Browse. And under Desktop, you see Exercise Files and select OK. So I've got my exercise files on the desktop. You might have yours someplace else. When you're browsing, you can find yours. Now I'll select Finish, and there's our exercise files inside that project. So when I click on the disclosure triangle, you see we've got all of our folders, and there's all of our exercise files. So I'm going to leave that alone for now. I'm going to create a new project, and so I just right-click on this area, or you can select the arrow next to the new project up here, and select C++ project. And this one's going to be called Working, and this is where we're actually going to do our work. You'll notice that the default empty project, it's got the Linux GCC toolchain. That's important. If you don't see that arrow there, then you need to go back and do your preferences configuration again because you missed something. Select Finish, and there's our working project. And so I'm going to open that one up. You see it's just got the includes in it now. It'll have more things in it once we do a build inside there. So I'm going to open the disclosure triangle on our C++ Essential Training and on our exercise files and on Chapter 2. And I'm going to come down here and select version test.cpp. Now I'm pressing Control-C on my keyboard to copy that file. And I'll just close all of that and select Working and press Control-V to paste it. And now I have a copy of that file inside the Working folder. Double click on it, and that'll bring it up. Now there's another little quirk you may run into with Eclipse here. The first time it runs and the first time it runs a project, sometimes it'll show some errors in the file. You can ignore those. If you just let it sit there for a few minutes, they'll actually go away as it finds all of its header files and it builds all of its indexes inside. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to press Build, and it's this little hammer icon up here, and that will build the project. And then I'm going to select Run up here, the larger of the two green buttons. And that will run, compiles it if it needs to, and it runs this. And you see that we have our results down there. It says GCC version 4.7.0 and version string 4.7.0. So this tells us that we have the right version of GCC, that it's installed, that it's working. Our tool chain is doing everything that it needs to do. There's one more bit of configuration that we need to do because the way that this is installed by default, it's not supporting C++ 11. And so if I select this part that's commented out and press Control and the slash key on my keyboard, it'll uncomment that. And that's a little Eclipse shortcut there. While I press Control S to save, and then I press this Run Working button again, and you notice that it has errors. And I'll say, no, we're not going to run it anyway. And these lines here are complaining about features that aren't in C++ 98, which is the default mode of the GCC 4.7 compiler series. So if you're not seeing those errors, that means that you've got a later version of GCC that's defaulting to C++ 11, and that's wonderful. We're going to go ahead and do a little more configuring inside the project. I want you to follow along, and you won't need to set the standard strings, but you'll need to follow along to do a little bit of other configuring anyway. So I'm going to right-click on the working project, and I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom here under Properties, and I'm going to open up the C++ build disclosure triangle, and I'm going to click on Settings. And here's where we set the versions of the compiler. For the C++ compiler, click on Miscellaneous there. And then here under Other Flags, I'm going to put in here -std, which means standard, equals C++ 11. And again, if your compiler is already doing that, then you might not need this string, or it might already be there. And then under the C compiler, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come down here into Miscellaneous. I'm going to say -standard equals GNU 11, and that's the C11 standard with a couple of GNU extensions. All right, so once those are done, I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to click on this Apply button. And then there's one more bit of configuring we want to do here under Run Debug Settings. I'm going to select Working, that's our working project. And I'm going to press Edit. And then I'm going to select Arguments here. Occasionally, we're going to want to run a program as if it has some command line arguments. So I'm just going to type those in here. 1 space 2 space 3 and press OK and press OK. And now we're all ready. Now, when I run this again, you'll notice it'll recompile it and everything will work. So click Run, and now it's working. It's showing the 1, 2, 3. That's actually this vector string 1.3 because I'm testing the C++ 11 feature. Here's the whole file, by the way. This C++ 11 feature that has initializer lists and also the range-based for loop. These don't work in earlier versions of C++. They're incredibly useful, and we are going to be using them in this course. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete version test.cpp from the working project. The short version of the reason for this is if you leave it here, it'll create conflicts when you try to use this project with the example files. A little more explanation, the way Eclipse is set up, it will compile all the files in a project. And as you'll learn later in the course, you can really only have one instance of a main function, the entry point to any C++ project in a given compile set. So since each of our example files has its own main, you can only have one of them in this folder at a time. So at the end of every one of these lessons, we're going to be deleting whatever is in working so that we have a fresh working to start with. So I'm going to press the delete key on my keyboard and I'm going to say OK, and that deletes it from there. But of course, it still exists in the exercise files because we were working on a copy. So now you have a working Eclipse with the latest GCC installed and running on a PC running Ubuntu.